Welcome to the Game Informer Show, a weekly podcast about the video game industry. Join us every Thursday for a discussion about the latest gaming news, reviews, and exclusive reveals. Alongside Game Informer staff and special guests from around the industry. We got one of those today. I am, speaking of guests, I'm your guest host this week, Kyle Hilliard. Alex is a busy man. He's got stuff going on, so I'm here to step in for him. Today, we're joined by Marcus Stewart.
Hey, I'm happy to be on one of these Kyle episodes for the first time.
You've never been on one?
No, not that you've guest hosted. You've avoided me.
Okay. On purpose.
Yes. You get enough of me on replay. You're like, I don't want him here.
That's right. We do spend a lot of time together playing, streaming and stuff like that. But and then I'm checking my notes here. This is confusing and weird. But we're also joined by Suriel Vasquez.
Hi, it's great to be here. It's my first time. Happy to be here on my first day on the job. It's wonderful. Can't wait to.
Oh wait, this is news to me. You're working here again?
I again is a strong term, but yeah. I assume that if I'm working here, I'm on the podcast. So
I got a news story for you to write if you'd like.
Oh, no, thank you. I'm okay.
Yeah, Shredder's coming to Call of Duty. You want to tackle that? I don't know what's going on there.
I mean, just write that up. Just throw that in there.
If you're confused, by the way, Suriel Vasquez used to work at Game Informer magazine. We were peers, he and I. And is this this is not your first time back on the Game Informer show?
It might be on the Game Informer show. I've been on Video Gameography and all things Nintendo. So I think I've been on everything but the flagship.
Okay, cool. Well, dude, I'm really happy that you're able to come on. It's always exciting to talk to you. It's been a while for you and me. I think I messaged you about the new Gorillaz album. That was our most recent conversation.
Pretty good album,
which we both agree is good. Yes, by the way. But we're not talking about that today. We are talking about a bunch of random stuff. So here's the deal. Sir, I don't know if you saw this. We revealed our most recent cover earlier this week, and in case you missed it, it's the indie issue featuring Sea of Stars.
Yeah.
So we have primary cover is Sea of Stars, and it's an awesome cover. The art on that cover is so good. It's like seriously like one of my favorite.
I saw it. It's really good. I like it a lot. I like both of those.
It's so
arts
good.
a lot.
But yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about Sea of Stars. I spent a lot of time with it, and then because it is an indie focused issue, we have a big feature in there, sort of like looking ahead to 30 indie games that we're all really excited to play. I wanted to talk to you guys about indie games and some of your favorite ones, and maybe even a little bit of like, what does indie even mean these days? It's such a confusing term that often doesn't make sense. And then we'll also go down the playlist. We've all been playing some random things that I think that we all want to talk about. And then we'll take a couple questions from the community, and then we'll call that a show. That'll be it.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I wanted to. It's one of those weird things where I want to talk about Sea of Stars, but it's also like, look, if you want to hear about Sea of Stars, like I wrote like 10 pages about the game in the most recent issue. So there's tons of stuff there, but I spent about 8 hours with the game. Like I played from the beginning, the first 8 hours. There is a demo out for the game, which is interesting the way they do it, because it kind of drops you in random places over the course of the first like 3 or 4 hours of the game. I don't know if you guys have played that demo.
I have.
Yeah, it's funny. They'll even redact story things like in the demo. They'll be like, okay, we have to get to blank, and which I think is fun and weird. So what I played was basically I just started from the beginning and played up until about 8 hours. Like I played up until the point. It was funny. I played up until the point where they sort of drew a line that were like, we don't want any coverage of the game after this point, right at the 8 hour mark. But it was funny because they were kind of like, I mean, you can keep playing if you want. We just request that you not write about that part of the game. But I was like, I don't even want to know. Like, I don't even want to like have to even think about like, what can I talk about? What can't I talk about? So I hit a point in the game where I decided to I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm just going to write about it up to this point. And I mean, one of the nicest things I can say about it is like I'm annoyed that I won't be able to play the full game for a few months here. I really enjoyed my time with it. It's like they're really leaning into their sort of Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG inspirations, which is certainly not like a wholly unique thing. Other indie devs have done this. Other people have made throwback JRPGs like this, but I really like what I played. Like the combat is interesting, the time button pressing is cool, the navigation of the game is something that really stood out to me, because a lot of RPGs of that era are fairly on rails. Like they exist in these sort of open areas, but you're sort of locked into a path, right? But the thing I really liked about Sea of Stars is that there's a lot more navigation options. It's not a platformer by any means, but like there's like ledges you can climb up and like things you can jump over, and you can, if there's a body of water, you can jump right into it and swim. It's stuff like that I think really sort of sets it apart and makes it more fun to control.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more interesting too, because it feels good too, for it not being a platformer. Like the jumping around, like, you know, it's not like you're necessarily aiming to nail a spot. You know, it's automatic from what I remember.
Yeah.
Even then,
like there's no action platforming, right, or anything like that. But it just feels good to move from point A to point B, which is cool.
Yeah, and the going in the water stuff is a nice surprise, because you see a body of water in any RPG or most games, you're like, oh, that's inaccessible. That's just a barrier. But it just seamlessly, you just go in, you start swimming around. There's like different depths you can explore and find. Like,
can you go underwater and explore there, or like is it like a
you're not
Zelda thing
exploring,
where you swim a little bit?
no.
And
I don't know if you can go under, but there was one sort of like dungeony area where it just kind of took you to like a lower level of that zone. You just kind of swim down, but they weren't diving. But yeah, I'm not sure if there is diving. Kyle, you might have
I think there is. It's funny. It's such a specific thing that I don't remember now. But yeah, and then the other thing, which is it's funny the way they approached it, because the game looks great. It looks like a 16-bit RPG, but then it has this layer of lighting on it that looks incredible. Like, because like you'll cast shadows, and you get a skill pretty early on where you can change the time of day, and it, like, the way the environment shifts from like dusk to dawn just looks amazing. And it's like one of those things that's like, oh right, this reminds me of a Super Nintendo RPG, but when you see that lighting, you're kind of like, oh yeah, there's no way this would have worked on a Super Nintendo. Like, it's like one of those like stark reminders. And it's funny, I asked them about it. I was like, how did you guys do that? Is there like this layer of like 3D modeling sort of like hidden? And they cut me off, and they were kind of like, look, actually, we don't want to reveal the secret of like how we did this incredible lighting in this like 16-bit RPG, which I was, happy to respect, obviously. But I like that they were just, it's like, they're like, we just want it to be magical. And it's pretty effective because it looks so good.
But to be clear, it's not like the Octopath thing where it's like 3D models with like 3D lighting effects, but like the sprites are 2D. This is something different than that.
This, in screenshots in particular, this looks like a 16-bit RPG. It looks like it belongs on the Super Nintendo, which is, what they were going for. And as far as what I've played, those first 8 hours, I think they were very successful. And I'm really excited to play more. They teased a little bit some connections to The Messenger, which is Sabotage Studios' previous game, which is a game that was like started as kind of like a Ninja Gaiden NES platformer, but as you progressed, it kind of turned into like a 16-bit kind of Metroidvania. It was like a weird twist, like you were playing an 8-bit and a 16-bit game. And all they would say, first of all, they said it does take place in the same universe as The Messenger, but it's like thousands of years before. So they shared that. And then the other sort of thing they teased is like, in the way that The Messenger had that sort of surprise like twist or change, you can expect something comparable in The Messenger, in Sea of Stars. But I don't know what that is, and I didn't see it. And like I said, I mean, maybe if I had played another few hours, I would have seen what they were talking about, but I didn't want to make myself confused.
Just turns into Final Fantasy VII.
Right, yeah.
It's a remake part 2 is in there. That's honestly what excites me the most about this game, honestly, because I'm a huge fan of The Messenger. And what I loved about that game was not even just the one singular twist that everybody knows, but that game is a lot goofier and a lot more meta than it lets on in the beginning. Like in the beginning, you think it takes itself pretty seriously, and then as you play, it goes some really wild places. And you could see a little bit of that in the writing, at least in the demo. But like it has a sense of humor. Like you mentioned before, like even the way they treat the demo, where there's like guards standing in front of a thing. They're like, yeah, you can't go here yet. It's a demo. Go away.
And there's this group of pirates that they're sort of the fourth wall breakers in particular. Like there's one character who will talk about the structure of RPGs and like leveling up weapons and stuff like that, which is a fun thing. And The Messenger did it well, I think, which is recognizing the medium that it is, a video game, and sort of using that to sort of you craft the narrative a little bit, because it's like a time loop situation, and it actually acknowledges like dying and retrying. And I always appreciate when video games do that, when they take advantage of the unique medium that the story is taking place in.
Yeah, and for something so much bigger as like an RPG, I'm excited to see how wild this game really gets. You know?
Yes.
I'm not taking it at face value the way I did The Messenger in the beginning. It's like and hearing you like, or hearing them kind of lightly confirm that, it's like, oh, what is this game really? You know, like there's going to be something else here, and I'm really excited to find out.
Even like outside of the idea that there might be a twist, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Sea of Stars is also inspired by like Star Ocean, right? Which like had a lot of like party members. So I'm wondering if like even if there's more systemic depth to Sea of Stars and something like The Messenger, which like, hey, even if the twist, you know, it turns out to not be as revelatory, there's a lot more to sink in with like just party mechanics and like, you know, simple like RPG elemental stuff than there was in The Messenger, which were like, you know, as fun as it was, like it was a platformer. Like the mechanics were relatively simple compared to something like Sea of Stars.
Yeah, I mean, you will definitely have. They did tell me the exact number of party members you'll have, which I don't remember off the top of my head. But the way it's structured is like you can swap in and out with party members like at will without like using up any currency or anything like that, right? Like you don't lose a turn by swapping in a character.
Oh, so you can do it mid-battle.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like, did you guys play Chained Echoes?
No, I didn't.
I played a couple hours of it.
Yeah, because it has a similar system where you can tag people in and out, and it doesn't cost you a turn either.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like that's something people are coming around on like lately. Right? It's like don't charge me interest to like, you know, get a new character in there. Like I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, one last thing I want to say about Sea of Stars is you know, we're talking about like maybe there's a twist. I don't even really know. They were super vague about that, but even ignoring all that, the 8 hours that I played were just like this really great 16-bit throwback RPG that I really liked, with cool systems and a fun story and good characters and great visuals. Like if that's what the full game is, like great. Like that part of the game is totally great already. So we'll see. I think they do have a release date. I should have had that ready to go.
It's August, I want to say 29th.
So it's not too far. It's a couple months here. Yeah, August 29th.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, I remember that.
But we'll have a couple more features about the game on the site, and of course you can read the issue to get a whole lot more concept art and screenshots and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, Sea of Stars, a great big first impression. I mean, 8 hours it's tough to call 8 hours a first impression, but I'm really excited to play the full thing when it comes out in August. Indie games, you guys, you love them, right?
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
Transitions.
You should have just done a whole Seinfeld bit. Like, what's the deal with these indie games?
They're not participating in the Indy 500, so I don't know where they're going.
Some of them are published by EA and Sony, but we still call them indie games. What's going on?
Lucasfilm does them all, I think.
All of them. They do all of them. I wanted to start off by kind of like, I don't know what you guys would consider maybe your introduction to indie games, as we sort of commonly refer to them today, which is like sometimes they're handled by major publishers, so it's like more of like a tone than like a specific publisher thing, which is like a weird thing that moniker has been applied to these kind of games. But I mean, for me, the big one for me was Xbox Live Arcade. I feel like that was the place where I first played, like really truly played indie games. I had dabbled with stuff like Cave Story. I'm trying to think of the timeline at this point. There were certainly indie games online. I mean, you could even look at like Flash games, you know, it's like an early version of indie games.
That was my starting point for sure. It's just going, you know, trying to circumvent my school's block on like sites with games in the title, and they knew about Newgrounds. So at some point you have to find like, what's the site that everyone's migrated all the like the server router stuff to like, okay, this site is technically, if you go to the URL is different, but if you go to this one, it'll basically redirect you, and then you can circumvent the block that way. You continue playing like some weird version of chess that's not as good, or like some platformer that is like stick figures and it's like super bloody, so it's like inherently cool,
hyper violent.
But
Drawn to Death.
Yeah, basically. I was playing Drawn to Death before it came out, so
that's right. Newgrounds was definitely a bookmark for me. God, I wonder if my parents ever looked at that now, if they were just like, this, what were you doing? This is what you were doing on the computer? I'd be like, I'm sorry, look, this is a different era. But I mean, I think I actually I do have a really vivid memory of playing Braid on Xbox Live Arcade for the first time and like downloading the demo and immediately being like, oh, I have to buy this. Like, I need to play the rest of this, just because it was such an interesting, unique idea. And it was also very quickly something that acknowledged, like, hey, the people that made this are people that grew up playing video games. You know what I mean? Which is like, I didn't really get from like a lot of PlayStation 2 games, if that makes sense. You know, they weren't really made by people who grew up playing video games, where stuff like Braid and like Explosion Man and those kind of things on Xbox Live Arcade, those were the games that kind of I felt like were being created by people who grew up playing video games like me. I don't know if you guys feel similarly. Maybe your sort of avenue into indie games is different.
I mean, I think there's always been this long time like recursion going on with indie games where, you know, even though I played Flash games, that it was easy to separate that from like something like Braid or like Geometry Wars, where it's like the novelty of like, you know, I didn't have a gaming PC until like 2010 or so. So like the idea of, oh, I went on my Xbox and I just downloaded this Geometry Wars game. And it's like, it's a small game, but it is like games that I used to play. You know, it's like, it is like games that I used to play in the arcade, and it's simpler. It's not like a big shooter or like, you know, a giant action adventure game. So there has always been this element of like indie games kind of trying to do what like the most ambitious they can, but also trying to like harken back because that's what they have to do, to say like, well, if I can only afford 2D assets and pixels and stuff versus giant 3D worlds, then I kind of have to use mechanics that are like, what if Super Mario Brothers, right? Like that was kind of the appeal. So there's always been this like indie games are kind of doing what, you know, not like, well, what big budget, you know, non-independent games are doing X number of years ago, but then introducing their own twists.
That era, that PS3 360 Wii era, for me feels like the first generation in games where people that grew up playing them were finally old enough to not only start making their own games, but also it felt like the nostalgia for that era actually really kind of started cropping up. Even like, because I was in high school and graduated in 2006, you know, like PS3 and Wii was coming out when I was leaving. And even around that time, it felt like that was the first time I saw people my age that had abandoned that stuff or just weren't looking back on it. We're like, oh yeah, remember Chrono Trigger? Like, yeah, that was cool. They should do that again. And why not get more like 2D Marios or stuff like that? And it kind of coincided with the indie market like becoming a thing of people being like, well, you know, if the people that created these things are not really touching them, we'll just do it ourselves. Or just do brand new things. It was all kind of wrapped inside that one big ball of like member berries, basically.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that also has to do with like the way that around that time was when social media, not when it took off, because that was a few years earlier, but I think when it had finally kind of started reaching a larger saturation of people. So I think there was like exponentially more people communicating with each other online than outside of like message boards or like IRC. So it felt like a new crowd of people were finally being able to talk to each other online about video games. And so like, what is the first thing you remember? Like the thing that you remember most is like, you know, things like Chrono Trigger, things like Zelda. And so like, those are like the first things that you start those conversations of like, remember this? And then like, those are like the first up to be emulated and say like, well, what if we made a new one of those? So, and also like, I think a lot of people were just kind of messing around with like, more like things like XNA, which was like an early kind of not freeware, but like very accessible form of development. And what that was good at was platformers. Yeah. So you made a lot of like 2D games, a lot of games where you're either moving, you know, overhead or, you know, sideways. And so you definitely start there. And by now it's like the tools have gotten a lot easier to use. And also, you know, those kinds of like early, like, well, those are like the ones you have to start with. Like, you have to make your Chrono Trigger. You have to make like a Zelda or a Mario. And then now we've moved on to the point where it's like, we want to make Silent Hills or like games that are like 3-dimensional, but like have that early PlayStation era and like, you know, beyond. I'm sure there's people working on stuff that is like, you know, something like Yooka-Laylee, right? Where it's like, this is more of a 3D platformer. So we've kind of moved on. We've kind of gotten the obvious ones out of the way and we're getting into more and more obscure stuff. Like this is a game that is just like Sonic R or whatever, you know, like we're getting more into the weeds of like things that people remember specifically, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
got Sonic R.
And it's like the
You're
first.
right though. Like,
Yeah.
no, but that's perfect because like I could totally see there probably was something that was like, well, obviously we're heavily inspired by Sonic R.
Yeah.
For our racing game or whatever. And
Yeah.
then there's the whole other side of it, which is confusing and weird, where like you think early indie, my brain goes to stuff like Journey and like Sound Shapes. But those games were fully published by Sony. Like there was nothing
Right.
really indie about them, but like in my sort of brain, it still fits for some reason. And I think it just comes from a matter of like sticking to like a unique idea and kind of expanding on it into a full experience that is still shorter than like a 20 to 30 hour game. I don't know how that happened, but for some reason, like I still think of those as indie, even though they are absolutely not.
I think scope is a huge factor, right? Where it's not like, okay,
Yeah.
like this game is not trying to be like, we're going to immerse you in a world for hours and you're just going to get lost here, or like, take on like some big grandiose storyline. It's more like, we have this one idea, like what if the character could jump in this way, or like platformer, but kind of stuff, and then we're just gonna, and it just happens to come from a company that's smaller. But like even something like Journey is like, okay, we have this one, we're gonna have a very well made thing, and that's where the backing of like a larger company like Sony comes in. But it's gonna be like a 2-hour thing, it's gonna be smaller in scope, and we're just gonna deliver a thing, and then it's gonna be over, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Some of that is also just the absence of like AAA tropes can kind of,
Sure.
at least for me, kind of feel like an indie, like, oh, this is like a smaller thing that doesn't do what 5 other AAA games do. It's not some open world thing with a gazillion icons. It's not some, multiplayer, maybe loot based shooter. It's just, it has like 1 or 2 singular ideas that it executes really well. And it's like, it's weird. It's like less is more a lot of times with indie games. Like, okay, it only does this, or it's doing something that hasn't been done in a while. Like, going back to reviving sort of like retro ideas and modernizing them. It's weird, but it's like it is weird amalgamation of like tone and scope and just creativity that sort of defines.
You just kind of know it when you see it.
Yeah.
In a weird way.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, yeah, it's technically not, but like, it's just, it has that indie spirit, right? Even if it's not letter of the law, there's the spirit of the law kind of thing.
Like decisions were made for artistic purposes as opposed to sort of financial purposes, right? Like Journey, right? You can't directly connect with people like, hey, let's go play some co-op Journey. It's like,
right.
Yeah, we did that on purpose. Like there's a like there's an artistic reason for why you can't hook up with your friend in a group chat and go play Journey together. I mean, I guess you can figure out a way to do it. But
there's ways around it, but it's like the intent is for you to find a stranger and not, right? And so like the idea of the intent being we want you to find strangers versus like, well, we want people to, the game will have a longer tail if we allow people to use multiplayer matchmaking and things like that. They're not business oriented. It's like we have a specific idea and an intent in mind, and we want to execute on that.
So I got a question here that we'll jump to a little early from our Philip Provencio from the Overblood Facebook group, who asks, could everyone recommend, say, 3 indie games to somebody who's not played many of them? Any genre. I'm just curious to hear some favorites from those people whose opinions I value. Which is funny, our Philip, because like that was my intention. Like I told the guys to pick like a handful of indie games to recommend, and then you sent me this question. So I shouldn't have revealed it. I should have made it seem like you kicked us off in the right direction. But so I told you guys to pick like 3 of your favorites, and we'll sort of round table them and discuss them. And then I'm sure we all have like a handful of extras that we just love that maybe we don't need to dive into. But Marcus, you want to kick us off with one of your favorites? Doesn't have to be in any order necessarily. Mine aren't ordered.
Yeah, I'll start with Hades. That was my game of the year in 2020 with a bullet. And I almost want to cheat and say like that is a gateway to check out all of Supergiant's games because I think everything they've done is fantastic. But I think that game next to Bastion is probably the most sort of like mainstream friendly, with it being a fast-paced, flashy action game. But I think, besides getting drawn in by how beautiful it looks, and all their games look fantastic, like that Gen Z art is phenomenal, but wrapping in a really engaging story that's steeped in a mythology that most people are familiar with, at least, Greek mythology. And also it's a good introduction to roguelikes, which is a genre that is primarily an indie genre. Like you don't really see AAA games.
Yeah,
that
Returnal
do roguelikes.
is like
they're
about,
very
like,
rare.
The only
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of, you get a 2-in-1 of like, hey, you can try out this genre that's a pretty big thing in this, I guess, in this genre of games, whatever.
Field.
But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Market. But yeah, and you can play it on basically everything now at this point, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's a platform that doesn't have it that's like current
really?
at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I played it on Switch. I'm sure that's where a lot of people played it.
Yeah. That game is fantastic. It plays super well. Like I said, if you like action games, I think it stands up to pretty much any AAA action game, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think that you can also use it even like among Supergiant games. You can kind of use it as like a litmus test for like what you like most about Hades. Kind of tells you which other Supergiant game you should play next. So if you like the action and like the combat, then Bastion's probably the one. If you like all the like the stacking buffs and systemic depth, like Transistor's probably the one. And then if you like the story and characters, then Pyre's probably is way more story intensive, and the mechanics aren't as deep. But like I think all of those games have their own share, and Hades kind of puts them all together and gives you like, okay, what do you like about this smaller experience? And then you can start going off on like, this is what I appreciate about this game, and start, going off on that direction.
Cyril, how many times have you beaten Hades?
Literally over 100, because you have to do it a lot to unlock everything. But I have gotten all of the achievements on the Epic Games Store version, because that's the one that I got for review. And then I've gotten the 1,000 points on Xbox as well. So I've done that whole loop twice, basically.
Wow. So
it's a very good. I've played it for a very long time. Very excited for Hades 2.
When Hades 2 goes into early access, Sarah, I don't know if you did this with the first game, but are you going to play it in early access, or are you going to wait? Because I'm a person that likes to wait.
I split a little bit, because I kind of thought in my head, because when I played Hades, I kind of figured I'll probably want to review this. So I kind of got ahead of it of, okay, by the time this game releases for real, I'll have put however many hours into it. So I played about 10-20 hours of the early access period, and then when the game came out, I started playing it a lot more for review. But I think with this one, I'm kind of curious to see what that whole process looks like. But also, I know that if it comes out this year, there's definitely a ton of stuff that it'll be competing with for my time for. So I'm kind of gonna play it by ear, but I'll probably buy it, I think, as soon as it's available to purchase. But whether or not I might do it on like a random whim, but I don't know if I have like a huge extended plan to kind of follow it through every phase. But I don't know. Right. I'm excited. I'm sure like whatever they release ends up being pretty polished from the get-go, because that was the case with Hades.
Cyril, how about you? You want to share one of your favorites?
Yeah, I was actually
if it wasn't Hades already.
Hades was actually like on my short list. So I'm glad I ended up not picking it. But I think the first one is Disco Elysium, which I think is probably not a game that needs a ton of like exposure at this point, because it's pretty popular. But it's still, I think, one of my favorite games of all time at this point.
Time.
Yeah. Right. Just for how I think it feels like not necessarily the first game, but one of the most successful games at kind of turning its story into gameplay without resorting to a ton of like action oriented mechanics. Because like it's an RPG in the sense that you're doing a lot of dice rolls, but it's all around like what decisions you're making and like how to like what direction you want to take like parts of the story and your own character in, so you can kind of so like the main conceit is that you're a detective in like a fake city. I forget, Revachol, I think is the name of it, and you are trying to figure out who murdered someone who's basically right outside your hotel room. When you go in to investigate, it's not where you're living there, but you're also like a terrible drunk who basically can't remember the last few days. And so like you have some clues about what you're supposed to be doing, but you don't know a ton. So you're asking a lot of people like, what did I do in the last week or so? Cause I was so drunk. But you have like 20 voices in your head that all represent different stats, and they're all talking to you. So like when you're talking to like a guard, you're kind of intimidated, like your voice of authority might say like, you should try to like, try to out alpha this guy, versus another voice might say like, you might want to try to find another way to convince him, or like you have voices that are arguing, and you have voices that, like, as you're walking, you'll feel like, oh, you like can feel a breeze from like this specific direction, and that kind of like, so you should go off on this like kind of random adventure and chase this lead down instead of doing the main quest kind of thing. But like all your dice rolls are like, okay, if you want to intimidate that guard, like you spec in a direction of authority, so you're like, you have a very like you have a bulky frame, and you might be able to pull it off. But if you didn't spec that way, you might have a lower chance. But you can if you want, right? So they're like all the dice rolls I think are really well gamified, and there are like certain things that your character can do depending on how you spec them. So it feels like an RPG, but you're really just doing a lot of reading. And like the writing is exceptional. Like it is one of the most well-written games, because obviously this game wouldn't work if the writing wasn't good. But it definitely goes a lot of places that video games typically don't. And I think that's kind of what you want out of indie games, is for them to explore spaces that don't feel like, okay, this is like a genre kind of, horror or like action flick. This feels a little bit more literary in that sense, in that it feels like you're exploring characters' interiorities in a way that video games often don't. It is pretty long. It is actually like about as long as a major like open world game. It's like 30 hours or so, but it is a well spent 30 hours. And the art style and like pretty much everything about it I think is really well made. So, and it's an independent team, so
it's on my pile of shame, because I started it and I got about 7 hours in, but then it just got sidetracked by other things. And the further I got away from it, the more it was like, oh, I got so much. Like, you're trying to remember everything you're doing and who you talk to, and even what your personality of your cop guy is. I need to go back to it, especially because they added that free update that I think put voice acting and other stuff into the game.
They added a more quests that kind of let you more. So like there are all these kind of ideas that, like, one of the mechanics is you can sort of find an idea, like, oh, like the idea of like a political system you can find, and like, oh, someone just introduced me to this idea, and you can kind of sit with it in the back of your head for a while, and that'll percolate, and eventually it'll evolve. And now they have these quests that are dedicated to like, okay, once you've kind of fully developed that idea in your head, you can kind of go chase a quest. Although I haven't actually gone back to it since like 2019, but that's my understanding of it. But like, yeah, now with voice acting, I almost feel like the recommendation for me would be like, if you are someone who reads books a lot, maybe treat it as a book you're reading instead of a game you're playing. So you can have like, okay, maybe I'm playing, something like Hades, for example, but then instead of like reading a novel or like reading nonfiction, I just kind of sit down with this for an hour and just kind of take it in and read it, right? Because it is going to just be a lot of reading. There's not a ton of like, Twitch gameplay in this, but yeah, it's totally worth it.
I'm debating whether just starting over and trying to jump in cold and remember everything.
Yeah. I think, with all the updates, it might be worth it to just start over, just because like, you could totally spec in different ways, I think, and figure out like what are the, like what paths we want to take based on like, I like the character of this voice most versus like, this thing is going to be really helpful for like this specific skill is going to help me a lot, right?
See my buddy Kuno.
Speaking of favorite games of all time and the opposite of reading, I got to get this out of the way. If you know anything about me at all, then you know that I love Inside and Limbo. I'm grouping them together. They're two different games that released many years apart.
You can't do this.
I'm doing it.
I technically recommended a whole studio.
You can't make the Mass Effect series. You pick up one slot on your favorite games of all time list.
Joe Juba. But yeah, I don't know. You can't. I guess if I'm gonna pick one, I'll pick Inside. I think Inside is the better game. But they're both so dang good. They're just these moody platformers that are just like some of the most like solid games I've ever played, just in terms of like functioning. Like they're just these really like wordless, beautiful adventures that are strange and confusing. And I couldn't even really tell you what was going on in them, but you just walk away from them feeling like you've experienced someone else's nightmare. And I love those games so much. If I have to pick one, I'm going to pick Inside. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go play Inside. But I don't even have really like a ton to say other than just I adore those games. And I pretty much replay them both every time they release on a new platform. I think I've played both on every platform they're available on. I even know all the puzzle solutions and everything, but I love existing in those worlds. It's so strange and bizarre. And it's just the kind of stuff I like from video games is confuse me and make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's rare a video game wants to aim for ambiguity in a lot of the like the storytelling even, and this is all like images and like very striking backgrounds and like things that happen to you that that it's completely wordless, so you don't know. You kind of have to do a little bit of work to figure out, okay, so what exactly just happened, and why, right? And so it's almost more like something like, instead of reading a book, it's like more like watching The Lighthouse or something, where you're like, okay, what exactly just happened?
Yeah, if The Lighthouse didn't have dialogue.
Yeah, right. Well, a lot of it is like you watched it and you're not entirely sure what everything means or like what it. So it's like you could almost substitute it, instead of watching like an art house film, you could play it inside, right?
Yeah,
but you felt something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that game's world is like the biggest carrot on a stick, because you see one weird thing, you're like, well, I'm going to keep moving to the right because I want to know more about that or see other things like that.
Yeah. So good. Marcus, what else you got?
Man, this is hard. I have such a big list, and I think I'm going to go with something that is maybe a little more unorthodox, but it's so interesting, and it's a good example of what Serial mentioned before about like something you don't see often and really only video games can pull off. And that is Bury Me, My Love, which is I
don't think I know this game.
It came out, God, I want to say originally 2017, 2018. It used to be only for mobile. It has since been ported to other consoles. My recommendation is to play it on mobile, and I'll explain why. The premise of the game is that you play as the husband of this young woman who lives in Syria, and she is trying to escape the country to get to Europe because some really bad stuff is going on in her country. And so I believe you as the husband are already in Europe or you're somewhere, but the entire game unfolds as just a text messaging app. Like she's texting you saying like, hey, I'm taking a convoy to get to the checkpoint. And then occasionally there'll be choices where she's like, oh, there's soldiers here. I don't know what to do. And then you get a choice of responses like, hey, maybe just, be cool, stay in the line and just try to get through, or say like, oh, you should try to sneak out and go around. And what's cool about the game, at least in the mobile version, is that they sell the the realism, because you'll send her a message and you won't hear back for her for like sometimes hours. Like you'll get a push notification when the game is ready to continue, where it'll come up like a text. Like you'll wake up the next morning, it'll say like, oh, I did the thing that you said, and it either went horribly wrong or everything went fine. And then you sort of continue playing. But like the week or so that I spent with it until you get to the end, it was one of the coolest narrative adventures that I ever played, just because it executes that idea so well. And I was on the edge of my seat because the choices you make are like, there's a lot of very serious consequences like that can play out. And also just the characterization of the protagonist. You get to know her. She's sending you pictures of things that she sees. She jokes around a lot, and you're like, oh man, like she seems pretty cool. I'm really invested in trying to do my best to recommend routes for her safety. But it's such a cool idea, and by the end of it leaves you reeling. There's different endings, of course, depending on how it plays out. But there's some pretty messed up things that happen, and it's wild. It's something that you could only do in video games,
Yeah. The fact that it sounds like it almost happens in like real time probably just makes it feel so real, right? Because it's like this becomes a background part of your life,
Yeah, you'll forget
so
that you're playing it until you get a text. And honestly, you get terrified when it'll be a big choice that you have to make. You'll pick what you think is the right answer. And if you don't hear from her for a while, you're like, did I make a bad choice? Because she's gone silent for like 2 full days. And then you start to wonder like what happened, and you can't message her like freely from what I remember. Yeah. So just having the game make you think about what you did that way and in a very realistic manner is wild. And it's a game I still think about on occasion, and I've never replayed it. I think at the end they kind of give you I don't think they do the thing of saying like, hey, this is how your choices led to this, play again. But it's one of those games where like, I don't think I ever want to replay it. I kind of like my canon playthrough, quote unquote, because then it will feel too much like a video game if I just do the opposite of what I did before.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's super cool. And I think it's on Switch. I know it's on PC. I don't know how they handle the like texting aspect of getting updates on your PC unless they incorporate like your PC's push notifications. But again, since the game is designed as like a mobile text messaging thing, you should just play it on mobile if you want to get the full immersive experience, in my opinion.
That sounds like the right call.
Yeah, it's a super cool thing. And actually, the studio has a second game coming out in March called The Wreck, which is not connected to this at all, but I'm excited to take a look at that just because I was really impressed with what they did burying my love.
Cool. No, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I had not heard of that, but now I kind of want to check it out. Serial, what else you got?
Yeah, I think so after hearing like that, the idea was to recommend games and not just our favorites. I think I'm gonna pivot.
Well, I can be favorites. That it doesn't have to be recommendations.
Well, there are games that I do want to give a little bit of attention to.
Sure.
So like, I think my next one is gonna be Soma, which is a 2015 game from Frictional Games, who have done pretty solid. I think I haven't played like their first two games, which are called the Penumbra games, but you might know them as the Amnesia, the Dark Descent people. But I think Soma is my favorite game of theirs, and there are a ton of things that I really love about it. For one, it's like it is a horror game that is about like the physicality of a lot of the things that you do. So like instead of like, okay, you need to plug this thing and put it into this place, you're physically like grabbing the object in the 3D world and moving it. It's like a first-person horror game basically, but it uses that interactivity really, really well. It's like, Amnesia was kind of not necessarily famous, but one of its big features is that like you were physically opening drawers and stuff, right? Which a lot of games ended up taking later on. But like that, all of that stuff is there. And this is more of a futuristic game. So you're kind of in a lot of like, you're messing with a lot of hard drives and like rubber tubes and stuff. But like the story,
rubber tubes.
And like you're like physically manipulating them in a way like that you don't do in a lot of games. But it is more of a adventure game in that you're kind of just solving puzzles and trying to get through the next area. But like the horror aspects I think are really cool because it kind of hits you with like on multiple fronts. So like first of all, there are these monsters that are chasing you, and they're like these big giant like balls of like dark static that are like these monsters that are chasing you, which you can actually they released an update about a year after the game came out where you can just turn those out. Well, not turn them off, but like you can make them not hurt you, right? So you can just kind of run around them if you want, if you don't want to have the like, oh, I need to, hide from the monsters and move.
Because that just lets you focus on the story.
Right. And like that's like you can totally play the game without those monsters being a threat and still kind of just take them in for atmosphere and just enjoy the story. And I think it's totally worth playing it that way. If you don't want to like play the stealth parts of it, because it has like one of my favorite science fiction stories, like bar none, just because of like how bleak it goes, how much it feels like it is speculative fiction, where it's just like, what if this really absurd thing happened? And it kind of hit on the idea of like digitizing consciousness, I think, before a lot of like other mainstream media did it. And it does it in a really clever way, and it like later on it ties that into interactivity and like things that only games can do. And it has really strong writing. I think it has like, it's one of those things where you basically don't know where this story is going, but it kind of gives you a lot of clues about where it is going. So it doesn't feel like it's just like changing things up to do that, but it is one of those roller coaster rides where you have to see what happens next. And it's like 10 hours. So you can get through in a couple nights. But yeah, it's a really strong case for like independent games just kind of doing having a really strong vision and just kind of following through on it and just doing things that you wouldn't expect like any like larger developers to do. Because I think larger studios tend to have like, well, we need to have some sort of combat mechanic or we need to justify it that way. And like the idea of saying like our central mechanic is that like, or one of our central mechanics is stealth, and we don't want to compromise that idea. But then going back and saying like, yeah, we can just turn that off if you don't want to do it, I think is really cool. And you're starting to see more options like that in games. So it's really, so it holds up really, really well.
Oh yeah. It's funny. All of you guys are really tackling these like super unique games that like use the medium in interesting ways. And all mine are kind of like really solid like platformers I just love that like aren't like sort of building on ideas of the past in an interesting way. But my other one a game that I just adore and will always adore and released on Switch somewhat recently, I think, is Fez. Fez is this like puzzle platformer that it's a 2D platformer, but the world's it's so hard to explain and just audio if you've never seen Fez. Like I would just look up a trailer for it, but basically it's a 2D platformer, but like you're rotating the world fully, and that creates like new opportunities for platforming and puzzle solving. And it's just like it was a game that like integrated QR codes into its puzzle solving and stuff like that, which is just like weird, cool stuff. I just really have a lot of affection and good memories of that game. Just like having a notebook to solve puzzles, because it totally functions as like a fun platformer. Like, hey, isn't it fun to try to land on these platforms? But then the puzzle solving gets like really intense and interesting, and like uses the vibration of the controller in interesting ways, and like you got to find all these secrets. It's a game that's like all about just like finding secrets and deciphering a language. Fez. I played like the first hour or two again when it came out on Switch, and it was just a reminder of just like this game is so interesting and cool.
I would recommend people that really liked Tunic last year to check it out, because when I was playing Tunic, all I could think about was Fez.
Yeah.
It goes for the same. It has the same sort of like mystery. And like hidden mechanics too.
It's definitely one of those games you kind of have to give yourself over to a little bit to try not to use strategy guides, because at this point it's like it's totally been figured out for the most part. I think there's still one puzzle that people haven't been able to figure out, like the Black Monolith. I don't think people like. I think people.
Is this Tunic or Fez?
Fez, right? Like the Black Monolith puzzle. I think
people
had to brute force the solution to one of those, if I remember correctly, without figuring out like what is the actual way you're supposed to. Because I think there's like some button combination you have to input when you're near the Black Monolith, and I think people just figured out like if we combine every possible sequence of inputs, and eventually one of those will work.
It's like community driven.
But I don't think they figured out like, okay, here's where the puzzle is, and they didn't figure it out organically, say. But it's one of those things where it's like you want to have like a pen and paper basically to figure out, okay, to take notes about where this thing is and where this thing, and like even if you put that aside, it's like Kyle said, it's a pretty good platformer that you can just like, a lot of that stuff is like bonus. It's you start seeing these layers in the environment and you're like, oh, I could go back and do all this stuff. But if you want to get to credits and like kind of move on, it's totally a fine way to play that game for sure.
Yeah.
Remember when we were going to get Fez 2?
Yeah. It was announced. Yeah.
It just reminded me of that.
Yeah. I do wonder what that game would have been exactly. I imagine it wouldn't have been just like, hey, more Fez. Right, like who knows? Maybe someday we'll learn.
Maybe
if
you solve the Black Monolith, it has Fez 2.
It has Fez 2.
Yeah. I mean, we live in the year of the Shadow Drop, right? So who knows? Maybe Fez 2 is out this year, and he just says like, I didn't want to promote it. I didn't want to like have a whole hype cycle, so I just worked on it in secret. Because like the first game ended up taking him like 10 years or something, and it took a pretty long time. So maybe he just said, I'm just gonna go quiet and pretend it's not a thing, and then maybe he just releases it
someday.
That would be on brand for him.
Yeah. Marcus, this is your third one, I think, right? We're on 3 here.
Yeah. There are so many fantastic single player indie games out there. I'm gonna flip it to multiplayer. I don't think you really talk about multiplayer indie stuff that much, but if you want to enjoy something with your friends that is an indie thing, one of my all-time favorites is Towerfall, which is made by Maddie Thorson, and it was the best thing to come out of the Ouya. It was originally
a contested field, if there ever was one.
Like honestly, if the Ouya's one redeeming thing is that it gave us Towerfall, which is a 4-player sort of arena battler where you play as these archers. And you're just shooting each other, and it's one-hit kills. I've always kind of, like, the most reductive way I've always described it to people was like, hey, Smash Brothers? What if you could just die in one hit? And you could only shoot arrows?
Yeah. It doesn't play like Smash Brothers, but it has Smash Brothers energy, right? Mm-hmm. It's that kind of game,
Yeah, like just 4 people in these big, elaborate sort of, like, platforming stages just jumping around, and it's so much fun. Like there was a period in college where me and my roommates and friends, that was in our regular sort of rotation for party games, and it would get so heated.
On Ouya?
Yes.
Wow.
You got to bring your Ouya over, man. We got to play Towerfall.
That is so funny.
It's very easy. You just pull out your pocket pretty much. No, I played it when 99% of people played it when it first came to PS4 as Towerfall Ascension.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, that game, I was blown away, not only just because of how much fun it is, but also just, and it was a great platformer which sort of laid the groundwork for its follow-up, Celeste, a few years later, because they're very similar to the way the platforming works. But I as a platformer fan, I just enjoy jumping around and clinging to walls and sliding, and that's usually how I got one over on my friends that maybe weren't as good as platforming, because I knew how to just hop around those stages real well. But what's also cool about the game is that there's a ton of secrets, almost kind of old school Mortal Kombat style. Like there's stages that can appear depending on weird little conditions of like the moon comes out on one stage, but it only happens one every so often, and different like hidden boss fights. And it's also got a surprisingly decent single player campaign where you can play co-op and you just fight a bunch of AI enemies in a stage, and there's different traps and bosses tied to that. So even that's fun. But that game will be 10 years old. Or actually, it'll be 10 years old this year, which is kind of wild now that I'm thinking about it. But I think that game still holds up. Like, even to this day, if I have friends over or I go to someone's house that has it, it's like, can we play Towerfall? Do you guys still like Towerfall?
Oh, no, I got rid of my Ouya. Sorry, I can't.
Exactly. But it is just pure fun. It is such a good game.
Yeah, we had it in the Game Informer kitchen for a while. On an Ouya, on an actual Ouya.
Okay.
We would play Towerfall occasionally.
The way it was meant to be played.
Sarah, what's your third selection here?
I'm going to choose Kentucky Route Zero as another very text-heavy game. But I like it. Almost is very different from Disco Elysium in that Disco Elysium is all about how your choices manifest and like seeing like all these different plot lines kind of unfurl in different ways, whereas Kentucky Route Zero is very much telling a story and it's sticking to it. And it was interesting because it was an episodic game when it first came out in like 2013, I want to say, and it only came out like the last episode came out in like 2020. So it's actually going to be, I think, 10 years old this year. But yeah, it's like if you want to read about like stuff that video games do not talk about, like like old minor like excavations and like the toll that like companies can put on employees and like things like academia, all this stuff that kind of sounds like immediately boring, but I think this game makes all that stuff really sing with like the way that it really talks about how all of these institutions impact people. And it is like one of those games that uses interactivity by like like the first thing it has you do is basically name your dog, and it's like you can either name it Blue or I forget what the other name is because I went with Blue, and like for the rest of the game the dog is just called Blue, right? So it makes you make these very small but impactful choices about what you're gonna do. Like one of the later chapters is like you're on this boat ride and where they make a bunch of stops, and so like your choices are, do you want to stay on the boat and have a conversation with one person, or do you want to go out and explore and kind of like stop, like do you want to get out of the car as you're on a road trip, right? Like do you want to grab something from the convenience store, or do you want to just stay in the car? And you can make either one of those choices, and those both lead to like very good conversations. But it is a choice about like, it is a game about community and stuff, and it has a very like a magical realism sense where there's like the Kentucky Route Zero is like literally like this non-Euclidean highway that you can go on, and like the directions aren't like go left, go right. It is like do 2 circles and then go counterclockwise, and then that'll lead you down a different path that wouldn't make sense physically, but like this is like this metaphysical thing, and all of that is grounded in like, one of the stops is just like this giant office that is just full of this bureaucratic work, and it's like it can be pretty lighthearted in spots. Like there's one point where they're like, oh, here's the person you need to find, and they'll show you a picture of her, and then like, yeah, I'm pretty sure she's on like the 4th floor. And you go to the elevator, you pick the 4th floor, and as you're going up on the 2nd floor, you very clearly see the person on the 2nd floor, but you're stuck on the elevator going up to the 4th floor, so you immediately realize, yeah, she gave us the wrong floor. So it's very good about that, like basically using all of these like adventure game things to tell a very well-crafted story, which is kind of, it's difficult to do when you're like, okay, we're going to release the first episode and then we're going to release the other episodes. And they came out with a collection that is just basically the whole game. But like a lot of my favorite parts are actually between the episodes. So they released these like interstitial episodes because there's 5 episodes and then 5 extra bonus ones. And a lot of them are just like, one of them, the first one's basically like a tech demo that they kind of disguise as like here's a museum of like all these exhibits that this artist made. but like later they get more and more esoteric. Like one of them was between I think 3 and 4, they released like a hotline, and it was like, here's an actual like hotline in the world that you can call, and like that tells you more about like this area that is going to be in episode 4. And like they released like a public television special, like a 30-minute, like we have this one camera filming this crew, and we're gonna cut to this guy who's made a bunch of weird experimental music, like public access basically. So they release all these like increasingly weird like multimedia projects as time went on. So it's like this really cool case for like how experimental independent games can be. So it's definitely worth checking out if you're like into story-based games at all. But again, just be like, same recommendation as Disco Elysium. Just treat it as like a book that you're reading, and not so much like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do some real gaming right now.
Yeah, I think that was my problem, is when it finally had the full edition. I played the first chapter, and I did go in kind of be like, all right, let's solve some puzzles. Let's play an adventure game. And it's like, no, that's not really what this is.
And
I need to give it another real shot.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the things that I really like about indie games, is that they don't have to be like, I totally get that people would bounce off of this game. But it's like, one of the things I like about indie games is that they can be experimental. They can't be more like, let's do this as like, let's kind of hit this niche as hard as possible without thinking about like, well, we need all these other elements to kind of bring more people in, right? Which is what a lot of AAA games do, is like, we don't necessarily think this like this feature is like good for the game, but it's like a thing we've seen in other games. Like, you should put combat in this game, right? And so like that'll attract more people, right? So I think independent games, more than other kinds of games, can say like, we just want to do the thing that we want to do as well as possible, and just make that the entire focus. It's not going to be for everyone, but I think that's where you find a lot of people's favorite things, is like, this is a thing that feels made just for me, and not just like, well, everyone likes Star Wars, right? In the same way that everyone likes vanilla, but it's like, you can find this weird random flavor at one shop, and it's like, that's my favorite ice cream ever. But it's like, it's like the beer flavored ice cream at this one shop is like, I'm not going to try to explain it. Just either try it or don't. Like, it's like,
sometimes you drag your friend to that ice cream shop, and you're like, yo, this is like the best ice cream.
Yeah. And it's not just about like, this is really good. It's also like, to some degree, when you're sharing a recommendation like that, when like, it says something about you and that person, of like, I feel like you would like this game, and it also says something about me. And this feels like one of those games where it's like, if you're really into Kentucky Route Zero, like, there's like a small amount of kinship that I have with you just as a person,
Right. Okay, so yeah, my number 3, it's like another, hey guys, it's another platformer. They're all platformers. But it's Iconoclasts, which is like this game that I just kind of stumbled across. I mean, it was when Andrew Reiner and I here at Game Informer were doing a like, what the heck is this, where we would just play like random Steam games. And I had seen a couple people talking about Iconoclasts, and I downloaded it and played it a little bit. You could probably go find that video. And it was like, immediately I was like, oh, I want to like play the rest of this. And like, can you please assign this to me as a review? And it's a functional kind of Metroid-esque indie game with like good platforming and good action. And that totally pulls you all the way through. It's like, yeah, this is a solid 16-bit inspired action platformer. But the thing that like I still think about like period like all the time, I'm not gonna say every day. This isn't Advance Wars Serial, which you famously once said I think about every day. Is this it's the story and it's a type of story that I admit I really love, which is basically like, hey, maybe the church is bad. Mm-hmm. It's like a type of narrative that I just really love. And that's kind of basically the idea of the game, is like there's this religion that sort of is instilled in everyone's lives in this world, and the ending of the game in particular really calls into question of just like, what are we doing here, people, and in a way that I just really love. And I need to revisit it. It's been a couple of years now, and I want to replay it. But Iconoclasts, just a really cool story against a really good action platformer.
Yeah, there's a line in that game that I think about a lot, where I think it's like one of the final bad guys. I don't want to spoil anything, but they're like, one of the characters says like, oh, this is bigger than you. And then like this person who is like a very much like a very loyal person to the church is like, nothing has ever been smaller than me, right? Like I've never had the opportunity to say like, this is my thing. And I've always had to get out of the way to do, like, I've always been at the service of other people. But like, without like spoiling anything, it's like, this is where I'm going to make, this is like where I'm going to, this is the hill I'm going to die on. And I don't care what anyone says. I'm going to take agency over my own thing. I'm going to be loyal to what I want. And I'm going to like, so like the idea of nothing has ever been smaller than me is like one of those things where it's like, sometimes you just have to take, like there are fights that you just have to take and say like, I'm going to do this thing for me. I'm not doing it for anyone else. I don't care what's going on that's like outside of my periphery. Like this is the thing that I'm dedicating myself to. And I don't care what the ramifications are.
Yeah, and it's from Joachim Sandberg, who goes by Cognac, is kind of like their screen name. And just, I think it was like yesterday, they shared a GIF of their new game, which is like, it's like this kind of looks like a robot woman with a gun. It's like another platformer. And they said, hoping to sort of reveal what this thing is in September, which is like very exciting. It's like, what is that guy working on? I want to see what that is.
I loved Iconoclast, and I actually played it because of your review, Kyle. I remember
great.
it when it came out, and I remember feeling bad for you because I think you were on GI shows and just other things after that, sort of like championing that game.
To this day,
like you were the only one. It's like,
I think I annoy Ben Hansen often when he wants me to bring your favorite game example of this thing, and I'm like 9 times out of 10 I'm like, oh, it was an Iconoclast. And he's like, all right, I get it.
Yeah, because I love that game too, and I was telling all of my friends like, you got to check this out. This is super cool, and I actually reviewed it for somebody, I don't remember, but I know I wrote a review of it too.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I was not aware that the maker was working on something. I was about to ask. I was like, yeah, what have they done since then? But
they're helping. Fun fact, his brother is a director, and he directed the 2 Shazam movies.
What?
And in this trailer for Shazam 2, there's a character wearing an Iconoclast t-shirt.
Oh, that's
good.
Wow.
I'd love to see it.
Love to see.
There's gonna be a scene where they're playing Iconoclast.
I hope so. I mean, I don't think that's honestly relevant at all to our indie discussion, but I remember learning that and being like, what a weird creative family. What a cool thing.
It's an interesting Thanksgiving dinner table.
Yeah. I have like a quick list that I just wanted to run down. I don't know if you guys had something similar. I'll rapid fire mine real quick. Cave Story, just fantastic little Metroid game. Splosion Man, a lovely, weird platformer that's very funny. You Must Build a Boat, my favorite mobile game of all time, period. Hyper Light Drifter, What Remains of Edith Finch. Undermine is the game that finally got me into roguelikes. I like Undermine a lot. Vampire Survivors is a recent one. And then Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, I would kind of consider an indie game, even though I think it did have a major publisher at the time.
Starbreeze.
Brothers.
Did they? I mean, if Starbreeze, I don't know if they're still around. Are they?
That's a good question. I don't think they are.
Because otherwise, technically, if you lose your publisher of your game, does that make your game indie again?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think they were like on the edge, right? And then
there were definitely
looking
some
them up on
troubles
Wikipedia. Oh,
it says EIC is a company.
So they're still around.
They're still doing stuff.
They're kicking. I know they went through a restructuring.
Yeah.
So I guess off the top of my head, to mention some that you haven't mentioned, I'll say Celeste, which is a follow-up to Towerfall, though a completely different game. I'll throw out Void Bastards.
What was the last one you said?
Celeste.
Oh, I thought you said it. I thought you said after Celeste. I thought you said Alpha Route. And I was like, I've never heard of this. What is this? Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll throw out Celeste. I'll throw out Void Bastards, which is a cool sort of like first-person shooter roguelike. Unpacking is a cool game that came out a couple years ago where you play as a young woman just moving, and you're just unpacking boxes, and as boring as it sounds, it's a really profound way to tell environmental storytelling. It's worth checking out. Tunic last year, one of my favorites.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Tinykin also last year.
I almost put that on my quick hit.
That
list.
was indie, right?
It was like it's one that's like kind of is, kind of isn't, right? Like, it's like hard to say.
Yes.
What definition are we using is what it comes down to ultimately,
Okay. I'll throw out The Forgotten City, which was one of my favorite games in 2021. Sort of a time loop narrative adventure that was originally a Skyrim mod. And last but not least, also a game that came out last year that not a lot of people talked about, but The Looker, which is one of the funniest games I've ever played, at least in recent memory, where it's a free game that is a parody of The Witness, the Jonathan Blow puzzle game.
Yeah, I need to play that. I have it on my Steam Deck. Do you think I could play it on Steam Deck, or does it need like mouse and keyboard?
No, you should be able to play. I don't know if it's actually like Steam Deck
Right.
but I mean, yeah, there's no reason why you can't play it. I think I played that with a controller actually, yeah. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. I think that game is not only a very hilarious deconstruction of The Witness, but it's actually very clever in its own right with the puzzles that it like the parody puzzles are also very good.
All right. Cyril, do you have any like some you want a quick hit?
Undertale, I don't think a lot of people need to be told to go play Undertale, but if you're looking, if this is like the first time you've heard of indie games, you probably should go play Undertale if you haven't. I'm going to go, I think this was kind of like my iconoclast for a little while, Owlboy. I want to say it might have come out the same year, but it's like it's one of those games that got really high review scores and was critically lauded, but I feel like I have not found a ton of people that have played that game.
Yeah. Hey, Serial?
Yeah.
I played Owlboy because of your review.
Nice. That's very good to hear. Just because I
like it.
I feel like that was the game that I was trying to convince people to play at the office, and I think Kyle might have been one of the only people who did.
I started it. Yeah.
Hey, that counts.
Yeah. It's cool. I don't like having full control of a bird. It's such a stupid thing. I don't like it. I don't want to be able to fly.
They
it's
take
so
that.
dumb.
They take that mechanic some really cool places. Like they wring like the maximum creativity out of that. And there's like,
what a weird line.
I also don't like Metroid inspired games that take place underwater where you can swim everywhere. I don't like those either. It's dumb. Let's move on. There's no reason to be negative about Owlboy. It's beloved.
So. Yearwalk is another game that I feel like has the same thing where it's like everyone was talking about it back in like 2015. People were really into it, and I have not heard people talk about that game since. It feels like
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's like a game based in Swedish folklore, and it's like this adventure game where you're just kind of like exploring this very tiny settlement, and you're looking for like this like mythical thing. You're not sure if it's a monster or some sort of god or something, but you're just going into like exploring like abandoned houses and stuff looking for this thing, and it's really well made. And then I guess like my last quickfire one will be Sable, which is like my favorite game from 2021, which is basically like this open world game that has a bunch of stuff in it. Like it feels very spacious where there's like these vast deserts and stuff that you're like riding a hover bike around. And it has a lot of like stuff from like Breath of the Wild, where it has the climbing mechanic and some like similar map systems. But yeah, they made a really chill open world game where you don't have to fight anything. You're just kind of climbing and exploring stuff. And it has that same kind of like, oh, I just stumbled into this really weird thing that it looks like they put a lot of time into, and it's just kind of hidden here. Like there's no like explicit thing telling you like, check this out, right? So you can just stumble into all this random cool stuff. So that is a game that I've recently really come to adore.
Can I drop one more real quick?
You may.
I think you might. I think Cyril, you'll appreciate this. I will say Doki Doki Literature Club.
Yeah.
Oh,
play
right.
it.
Yeah.
It's free. Don't look up anything on it. Just play it. Trust me. I've talked about it on the show before.
Yeah, I played it on
PlayStation
4, so I paid for it, I think.
Oh, you got the plus version?
Yeah, which is good. Yeah, it was cool. I enjoyed it. Yeah. Less said, the better, honestly, for that one, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so we're going to wrap. Well, not quite here. We'll do the playlist, and then we'll answer a couple questions. I want to save you for last for the playlist here, which is where we just talk about what we've been playing.
Sure.
Have you been playing Wolong at all, Serial?
I have. I downloaded it the day it came out and I just have not had time.
Okay. It seems like your jam. I think you'll like it. I'm still loving it. I'm still playing it. I almost want to like, this is like me printing a retraction for last week, I think it was, where I was like, it's actually not very long. I think I'm like 3/4 of the way through and I'm like 15 hours.
Despite the title.
That was a lie. I'm on like part 5. I think there's 7 parts, and I think I'm like 30 or 40 hours in or something like that. So I still got a ways to go. But
what distinguishes the parts?
Ooh, I mean, they're levels basically.
Okay.
Like it's kind of the best. It's not quite that simple. Like one part, like part 5 in particular, is rough because you fight Lubu in there, and
I've heard of him.
Lubu was brutal. Like I've actually found the game a nice challenge. Like it's not super hard. I would actually put it lower than Sekiro, which is like its main inspiration. It's not as hard as Sekiro, and I'm quite over leveled often just because that's how I like to play these kinds of games. But Lu Bu, oh my god, and it seems like everyone is saying that he is kind of like the Spike of challenge in the game, which is like in the middle, weirdly. Like bosses after him I've beaten in one try. Not everyone, but a couple. And it was the one occasion where I actually pulled in online help. I was like, I had tried it like 5 or 6 times, and I was like, I think I could do this, but I think it's going to take me 5 or 6 more tries. I'm going to call in some people to help me. And that was like the first occasion that I did that. And it was great. They called some random people came in and helped me. But I just wanted to shout out that it's longer than I thought, and it's still great. And I want to see it to the end. I'm really having a good time with it. And then the other thing I quickly wanted to call out was the Castlevania Dead Cells expansion. I think the plan is for Brian Shea and I to discuss that on All Things Nintendo. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, tune into there. Or I think I also talked about it over on MinMax too, but it's cool. It's good. It's good Dead Cells content. So Marcus, you gave me actually another indie game that you're playing, and then a weird one that you said you've been playing, which I wanted to hear.
I'm trying to think
about.
which one is the weird one.
Actually there were 3 because it was Birth,
right,
and then we'll save the full discussion, the proper review discussion for next week, but you can at least say that you've been playing Bayonetta.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And then the weird one is you're playing a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess.
I think Birth's the weird one.
Well, what is
like
Birth? I don't even know what that is. I mean, I know what it is like in the real world. I don't know what it is in the video game
Birth
world.
is so this game first came to my attention at Summer Games Fest last year when we flew out to LA. It was one of the games that was being shown, and I didn't get to play it there, but I watched people play it, and it's this weird point and click adventure game where it's set in this world where everyone is sort of this like bird skeleton. Like everyone just looks like a dead bird, basically.
Okay.
And presumably you are also one of those. And you're just going around trying to collect bones and organs to, I think, complete yourself or somebody else. I don't know yet. It's like purposely a little cryptic, but it unfolds on like one 2D street, and you're just going around entering buildings and just doing all these very sometimes simple, sometimes complicated. Other times it's more just sort of like cute interactions to try to find like a spine or a rib cage, or last time I played I got, I think, a spleen or something. And it's very weird. It's cool. I don't know if I like love it, but I am fascinated by it. Like, it's not bad.
I have games like that. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, right? You're like, I'm not like, oh my God, over the moon over it, but I'm like, I want to see where this goes. This is weird. Guts, kind of like a flat, interesting sort of like 2D art style. It reminds me of something I would have seen as like a kid's book, and then you don't realize until you're an adult that you're like, I don't know if this was appropriate for kids. But it's got like a weird sort of like almost childlike, but like dark charm to it.
I like that aesthetic. I know what you mean. It's like Burton-esque, maybe, kind of like sometimes.
Yeah,
on his era.
Not as Burton, because I feel like when I think of Burton stuff, I just think of like black and blue.
Sure.
This is definitely a lot more brown.
I mean more like dark, but like dark and not so dark that children
but
can't
like
enjoy
kooky,
it.
right? It's like
but maybe a little weird. Is that am I getting the right idea there? Or maybe
because it's not like gory or anything like that. It's just sort of like, again, just the idea of like you're collecting organs and body parts, and just like, okay, and everything around you, every character is just this dead skeleton. But they have like hair, and they're like having coffee and stuff.
All right.
Yeah, it's a weird game. I want to see where it goes and what happens, when you get your body, I guess, reassembled. But it came out last month. It's only like $4 or $5. I believe it was made by a single developer. So yeah, been chipping away at that. Usually I do like a couple of puzzles a night.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. It's got a cool art style. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Yu-Gi-Oh!
Well, hold on, real quick. What can you say about Bayonetta? The full review will be online after this podcast goes live, but you can at least say you're playing it, I guess, right?
Yeah, because we did the NGT.
Right.
I have since finished the game, so I'm actually almost done with the written review. But yeah, I will say that I love that game.
Oh, you can say that. Okay.
Yeah, it's for you, if you're not aware, it is a prequel to the mainline games. You're playing as a 10-year-old Cereza who is Bayonetta as a child. And you're exploring this enchanted forest with her demon buddy, Cheshire. And it is one of the prettiest games of the year. Like the art style has this very painterly sort of like illustrated storybook thing. Like this whole game goes for the like you're being told a children's fairy tale because there's a very lovely narrator that voices everything. She voices Cheshire and does the thing of like it reminds me of the joy of being read a bedtime story because she'll narrate Cheshire and do like her impression of his voice where it's just a gruffer version of her voice and it's very cute.
How gruff are we talking? Is it like New York, Danny DeVito? Like
it's like a lovely elderly British woman.
Okay.
I mean, maybe she's not elderly, but she sounds like an old lady.
Right.
And then when she does Cheshire, she's like, oh, you know, oi, Bayonetta. I'm going to butcher that. I'll gobble you up, little girl. That's what it sounds like.
As far as Suriel and I know, you nailed it.
You just played a sample from the game. I think
is this game on your radar, Suriel? As like a Bayonetta fan?
It was interesting because that was honestly the most interesting part of Bayonetta 3 was like, oh, there's this hidden demo for this other game in this, and like I played through that. I was like, what is this? And they're like, oh, Bayonetta Origins coming soon. I was like, oh, okay, so they're gonna do a prequel game. So that I'm curious to check it out for that alone, and it was definitely like that game plays nothing like Bayonetta, so I'm fascinated by how this game is going to be received because it's not like a character action game as far as I know, right?
No, but there was more combat than I think people expect.
Okay,
too. It's the best way I've described it, or in my head, is like it's Bayonetta if it borrowed Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons template and then had the storytelling of Winnie the Pooh. And if you mix those up,
which is like the opposite of Bayonetta in a lot of ways, yeah. So I'm fascinated to see what the reception of this game is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's fun. The combat is a simplified take on the Bayonetta combat, but it's still very good for what it is.
Okay.
It's because you're controlling Cheshire, who does the combat, and you're controlling Bayonetta at the same time, but she can only sort of tie enemies down with her magic, and sort of combining their abilities as well as the elemental abilities that Cheshire gets along the way, which gives him more powers. And then there's a big enemy variety, and they all have different vulnerabilities. So you're kind of swapping between like grass and water on the fly to deal with this guy, or I'm going to yank his shield away with my vine magic because that's the only way to get his shield away. And then they both have full skill trees. Like I said, there's more to this game than I think people are expecting it to be. But for how simpler it is compared to a mainline Bayonetta game, I had more fun with it than I thought I would. And it gets better as you unlock more skills. And they really get the most out of what is essentially just single button combos,
Okay.
But combine that with the pretty large open world, or not open world, but kind of like open hubs that have sort of like Metroid style gating. As you get more of the elemental powers, you're going back to places to open barriers. You're finding all these collectibles. There's a lot of really clever tag team focused environmental puzzle solving. There was like one cool one where like Cheshire's running a hamster wheel to move Bayonetta across different platforms, and a lot of puzzles only repeat once. It's a cool thing. Like it is a much more substantial game than, like I said, I think we all thought it was like, oh, it's probably like this 3-hour sort of side project.
Yeah,
spat out, and it is not that.
Okay.
You said so much more than I thought you could, Marcus. I thought you were going to be like, don't worry, full impressions coming soon.
I'm still withholding a lot. I mean, a lot of
good. Okay, cool.
Embargo, like I can't talk about things beyond a certain point. But, look for my review next week.
Yeah, I mean, you'll probably be able to talk about it on the show next week or sometime soon.
Yeah, next week for sure. But like I said, I will say now it's one of my favorite games of the year so far.
Wow. All right,
cool. It's a very pleasant surprise.
Okay. Marcus, you're playing a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh. You okay?
I mean, I'm fine. I love Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't know if you know that.
I mean, is it tied to a specific Yu-Gi-Oh game, or are you I've picked up the card game Yu-Gi-Oh?
Oh no, I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh, the card game, literally since its inception. I'm a Yu-Gi boomer, as the community. Is that what they call them now? Us.
That's a
like thing? If you've been around for like since the first gen, you're officially a Yu-Gi boomer at this point because you remember the before times. Yeah, but I'm playing Master Duel, which is now a year old. Came out, it surprise dropped last January. I think it's the best.
So this is
video game ever made. It's an online
mobile, or were you playing on PC? Where are you playing it?
I play it. I split my time between PC and Switch.
Same account, or you have like 2 separate accounts?
Yeah, it's cross progression. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. Okay.
And cross play too, but it's on
cool.
everything: mobile, consoles, PC. It's an online just Yu-Gi-Oh game, though it has like a solo mode too. And I've been playing it since it launched. Like it was on my top 10 for our 2022 Game of the Year list. And we've streamed it a couple times, but they just had their 1-year anniversary event where they added some new modes and they added just some new prizes, a new structure deck. It's relevant to me because in real life, and forgive me if you guys aren't Yu-Gi-Oh fans.
I'm giving you a platform,
but,
man. Do it.
Thank you. In real life, I'm a big Dark Magician player because he's the main character. Yugi's a ace monster in the show. So when I was a kid, I was like, I want to use that guy. And they added a new structure deck that brought basically the video game deck to parity with his real life deck that I have. So I've gone back in with that, and I'm trying to get to the top ranking, which I've never done. Like when you play online, there's multiple sort of tiers. And when you get to diamond or whatever, you get this special frame. And every season, because there's it has like live service thing, like it's got a battle pass that resets, and every season it resets where it knocks you down a rank from wherever you were in the previous season. But then once you get to like top rank, you never lose that. So everyone always knows that you did it once. And I've never gotten that. I've gotten very close, but there's always ebb and flow about how much time I'm spending with it. But now with this anniversary event and they've been throwing all these commemorative cards and more gems for playing, I've fallen back in and have been playing pretty much every night and working my way up. And it's still a very good game because Yu-Gi-Oh is awesome.
Is it monetized heavily, or is it pretty reasonable?
It's pretty reasonable. Like, you can buy gems, of course, with real money. You can buy other things, but I've never spent money on it. And I've put between Steam, Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox, I've probably put close to 300 hours into it.
That's a lot, man. That's a lot.
Like I have 100 hours on Switch and PC separately between them. So that's 200 hours between just those two. It is my, it's my game where if I want to play something but can't decide what to play, that is the go-to. Like I just want to interact with a thing.
And you're playing against other people, right? It's just like you're looping through multiplayer matches online.
Usually, like I said, there's a solo mode where you can play just different AI-driven decks, which is a good way to learn different archetypes because they're all archetype themed. So you're like, oh, I want to learn how to play more against Dragon Maids or whatever. I'm just going to play that story, quote unquote. And then maybe you'll decide that you want to build that deck. But yeah, usually I'm playing against other people and
all right,
mostly doing well, we'll say.
I'm proud of you, man. You're killing it.
I just want to be the king of games.
Yugi Boomer. That should be like your new screen name somewhere.
So yeah.
Suriel, I asked you what you've been playing lately, expecting you to say Wolong. Honestly, is what I thought it was gonna. But you've just been playing Breath of the Wild, I guess, again.
Yeah,
on the same save file. I don't.
No, so like I lost the Switch that I had my save file on like years and years ago, but I had stopped playing by that point. But I'm starting a new save file. Just
master mode
for a number. No, regular.
Right. Okay.
Because so I started it as like. I don't really want to watch like a show while I'm on like my exercise bike at this point. So I just started, what if I just started playing Zelda? Because Tears of the Kingdom is coming out and I figured, okay, I should go back to this. And so I've been playing it for like 40 minutes to about an hour, depending on how long I pedal. So I've been playing it basically since the year started and I'm still like not done with it because it's a long game.
Oh yeah.
So I'm coming back to it now, but like realizing that I did not play as much of this game as I thought I did.
Did you finish it before?
I did. So like the thing that I beat kind of like the main quest, right? And I did the 4 divine beasts. But what I did was like I would basically just kind of explore the entire. I did like a loop around the map, unlocked all the towers, and then said I should do these quests because they give you a bunch of the divine beasts give you a bunch of like really strong bonuses. And I think at that point I had like pressure from like, oh, I should be playing this other stuff because at the time I was covering games professionally, right? So it was a combination of like there are other things I should play, and like I realized that like I'd done like 70 to 80 shrines at that point, and I realized that like I think the rest of this game is just like I feel like I've gotten the like that first squeeze of the sponge almost of like, oh, it's really easy, and if I wanted to squeeze more water out of it, it would take a lot more effort of like going back to areas I'd been and kind of like doing more dedicated searching for like, where is this one shrine that I'm looking for that is probably around this area. And I realized I'm probably not going to enjoy that as much as just like when everything felt new, right? Of like, I could go in any direction and find something cool. So at that point in 2017, I decided to kind of put it down and like, maybe I'll come back to it one day. And now I'm coming back to it, and I'm being like, with that in mind, I'm being extra thorough since I don't have any outside pressure to finish it.
So you are trying to get all the shrines and everything?
I'm trying to get every shrine, and I'm trying to like get as many Korok seeds as I can. The one thing that I am doing that I didn't do last time that I couldn't do was that one of the DLCs gave you a mask that kind of let you know when Korok seeds are nearby. So I've been wearing that pretty regularly because sometimes you'll come in like, because you know the way Korok seeds are hidden are like, here's like a hole in a stump, and then like you have to find like the metal ball that you're supposed to place in there, and sometimes all of those signifiers will be there, but there won't be a Korok seed associated with it. And sometimes I would spend too much time trying to figure out like, is this a puzzle or not? And I think that mask. Yeah. That mask kind of alleviates that issue, even though it makes it a little bit easier of like, oh, I wouldn't even thought to check like under this kind of like rock bridge for a seed. But it kind of just says like, there's an area, you might not know what the puzzle is, but you know that there's something close. But other than that, it's just like I've been carving kind of a path through like most of the area. And I'm at like 75 shrines, which is basically where I ended up last time. And I've only done like 2 divine beasts. I haven't even been to most of the western half of the map yet. So I've just been enjoying a lot of just like, I'm out here in the wilderness. I haven't even like activated this tower, so I can't even see the map yet. But I'm just kind of like going from one shrine to the next, trying to figure out like, what am I doing? And it feels really cool and like calming to get lost in that wilderness again. Of just like, I have no idea what is going to be around this corner, and it's like snowing, so like I have to wear like protective winter gear, or like I need to wear like drink elixirs and stuff. So it's felt really nice to just go back to that game and realize that it feels like half of a new game, where it's like, oh, I remember this is like where the Yiga clan hideout is. I can't go here
you're
yet.
Removed enough from it that you don't quite remember everything,
right? So like, oh, I know that I'm gonna have to do like the divine beast at some point, but like I don't remember what, like, oh, what's his name, the bird guy who sings all the songs, where it's like he sings you a song and then you're supposed to figure out like what the puzzle for the shrine is. So it's like, oh, when you're sitting in here, when the sun strikes from the northwest or whatever, shoot an arrow into the sun or whatever. But I don't remember the specifics of a lot of that stuff, but I know that it's like, okay, at some point I'm gonna have to figure out like, oh, here's this giant door that I can't get into any other way in like the snow region. And I know that I have to roll a snowball down the path, right? So I know there are some things that I remember, but like just finding like, oh, I found one of the 3 Leviathan bones, or here's like the giant sword that is like randomly stuck in the ground, and I have no idea what that is because I didn't find it last time. So it's been like, it's been like a joy just like kind of taking it 40 minutes at a time. And even now, like I figured, oh, this will be like 100 hours maybe, and I feel like I'm approaching that milestone, and I don't feel anywhere close to done. So now there is a little bit of like, oh man, I should probably finish this before Tears of the Kingdom comes out. But it's like, oh, that's not until May, but that'll sneak up on me, I imagine.
I mean, I'm glad to hear. It sounds like it's still super fun, right? It still like holds up, and like, gosh, I have a master mode save. Right, that I think I took out one of the divine beasts with, and then I made the mistake of going to like the elephant divine beast, which is like has the hardest boss in the game, which is like really tough if you're playing on master mode. Like it's like I should have gone somewhere else first. What was I thinking? But I wonder like, should I pick that up and like play in preparation for Tears of the Kingdom, or am I gonna burn myself out if I go play a bunch of Breath of the Wild? I don't know.
Definitely a fear, but it's like it's because I don't know how much they can do. But the other thing that's kind of reminded me of like, I think that I feel both validated of like, I don't think there's been a open world game quite like it. I think Elden Ring is definitely closest. But even in Elden Ring, I feel like there are things in Elden Ring that I see as like, this is maybe a problem that I think Zelda kind of does really well. Like the idea of there's not like a flat difficulty curve, which I think Elden Ring had like problems of like, if you explore everything, you're going to be over leveled and then you're going to get your ass kicked and it feels kind of uneven. Whereas I think Zelda's a little bit more smooth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But also I see like, I see areas for improvement that I feel like makes me more excited for Tears of the Kingdom. Like the idea that you can't swim at all and that there's not a ton of like, there's stuff in the water for sure, But like the idea, like even if they say like, hey, same landmass, but you can explore underwater more evenly, I think would be super cool. But they've chosen the other way of going to the sky.
Yeah.
Or things like, I totally understand the stamina system, but the fact that I feel like I could outrun Link in a race, in a foot race, I feel says like maybe drain that stamina meter a little more slowly.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm seeing things where it's like there are ways that this game could be even better that make me excited for Tears of the Kingdom even more so.
That's cool. Okay, that's good.
So I'm very curious to see what like that comparison is like. So maybe I think there's a case that you could play some of it, maybe not all of it, but just to compare, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of people who haven't played Breath of the Wild in a while that are going to be like, oh, this is like that, but more. Whereas I think if you play Breath of the Wild and then Tears of the Kingdom, I think some of the more direct comparisons are going to be like, oh, this is totally different in all these ways, right?
Yeah.
But
I should, because I things change. I believe I'm going to be on the review. So it would probably be in my best interest to be like, okay, how does Breath of the Wild work again?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's like, let me get that. Even though, God, I put something like 300, 400 hours into Breath of the Wild at this point.
Yeah. Or even just to familiarize yourself with like all the different way the Korok seeds are hidden.
Right.
Because I feel like I'm still finding kind of new ways that they're hiding those things.
That freaking game, man. I swear, every week since it released in 2017, I feel like I see at least one new clip or video of something I didn't know you could do in the game, or some weird thing I just didn't know existed. It's like every week for like 3 or 4 years, I feel like it's been happening. It's so insane.
Yeah, I it's not a thing that I used a lot last time, I think, but like the idea that when you're in the ice region, if you have like, you can melt things with like fire weapons, but even just like if you stand near a block of ice with a fire weapon, it'll slowly melt without you having to use the sword at all, like to wear down your sword. So that I've just been like, okay, there's a giant block of ice and I'll just stand near it for like a minute or two, watching it slowly kind of melt. And like all the systems interaction stuff in that game is still kind of is surprising how many new things I'm discovering, even as like I'm in this like 70 hours into this playthrough.
I think the weirdest one I saw recently was someone rode a cliff off a horse, or rode off a cliff riding a horse, and then jumped off the horse and shot the horse with an ice arrow so it froze. and then what happened was they parachuted down or whatever, paraglide, and the horse landed on the ground and then was still frozen for a couple seconds and then just, unfroze, and it was fine. And it was like, you could save your horse if you ride off a cliff by accident by shooting it with an ice arrow in midair. It's like,
yeah.
Oh,
and even that, I like this is, I only did like Eventide Island this playthrough, or like I found the
right, yeah,
the
because
great
you didn't do that
horse,
last time. I was so surprised about that. Yeah,
which was really cool to do. Of just like, oh, I can't fight this Hillnox normally, but like the idea that you could steal the ball from him that you need to take in order to complete that shrine. Without waking him up, I think is like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. But like a lot of really clever improvising, which happens basically all over that world, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's still really fun. I recommend it if you haven't played Breath of the Wild. You should definitely check it out. Still holds up even like a generation after. I think it's still probably my favorite open world game.
Turns out that game that is often referred to as one of the best games ever made. Still good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll wrap it up here with a couple questions from the community. Let's see. William Nutt Irizarry from the Overblood Face Group asked, do you think 360/PS3 era aesthetics will ever get the indie nostalgia boom the same way N64 PS1 is having now? Which is like, it's a much less specific aesthetic, right?
Yeah, it comes down to just fidelity at a certain point.
But I feel like I am playing some games now, and I mean this politely as like a positive thing, that are like, oh, this kind of reminds me of that era. Even if the visuals are hard to pin down. Like there's this game that came out recently, Scars Above. Or is that what it's called? Is that right?
Scars Above, the sort of like space
horror
game, right?
Scars Above, it's like a third-person shooter, a little bit of some soul stuff in there where you're like on an alien planet.
It's kind of Returnally.
Yes, like at least in the way it like looks and the story is being presented, it looks kind of Returnally. And playing that for about an hour, which I enjoyed initially, in that I was like, this kind of reminds me of a 360 game. Like if this had released during the 360 era, I think this would be like a game that we all talked about really fondly. So I'm getting some of that lately, less than like, oh, this reminds me of the look of a 360 game, because they started really at that point, you know, they didn't all have to share the same aesthetic like they do on PS1, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. Like PS1 and 64, that visual style is like distinct because it's just rough polygons basically.
Yeah.
So you look at that and go, yep, that's a PS1 game. But then when you get beyond that, as games start to look better and better, that divide starts to disappear, and it just becomes, this is a slightly worse looking version of this generation, but it's not not necessarily a visual style, because there's games that come out now that it's more of a knock where you see like, oh, this would have been a nice PS3 game, but in 2023 it's a little disappointing.
Yeah, I think I think that there are a lot of ways that you can emulate the look of it, because I think there are games like Bright Memory comes to mind of like, here's a game made by like one person who that gets like basically uses the hell out of the Unreal Engine to do some really impressive stuff technically, but like that doesn't remind me of a 360 game, because I feel like a lot of what you would need to do to make it look like one just involves a lot of things that would just take larger and larger teams, because I think the reason a lot of those games are a little easier to emulate is because the team sizes were kind of small and it feels doable for a small team. Whereas I think even getting to like the fidelity of like the like some of the best looking games on like the PS2 generation, something like Metal Gear Solid 3 or like Resident Evil 4, a lot of that is like, yeah, all the textures look like, you know, a step higher than PS1 games, but like the fidelity of the animation, I think just takes a much larger team to pull off. So I think that you could emulate the look, but maybe not necessarily the feel. And I think we're reaching a point of diminishing returns where it just gets harder and harder for smaller teams to pull off.
Yeah.
I do like, by the way, that this lately that there's been like a PS1 kind, like that's now become an aesthetic, like Signalis. Like I like that kind. Like let's more of that. That's cool. I'm into that. Let's do one more. We'll just have 2 questions this week because we're going long. It turns out we like indie games and talk about them a lot. Nick DiPaolo from the Overblood Facebook group asks, with all the remakes coming out these days, should we be worried that game preservation will become less important, as people might just say, oh, we have the remake, so why do we need to play the original? I think this is a legitimate fear. I like remakes. I'm really excited for Resident Evil 4. You know, please make those. I don't mind playing those. I get excited for them, but like I do not want them to delete the original versions. That would be sad, and I certainly don't want that to happen.
Yeah, we've seen a few instances of that, because then, they reversed this, but then Rockstar take down like the old digital copies of the PS2 GTA games when that collection came out. Yeah. And then everyone got mad about that, so then they put them back on sale because they're like, oh, you want this nicer version, right? That is also deeply flawed.
Yeah, there's always this assumption that like, well, people just want the most updated version of everything, right? Where they're like, you know, you want like the most expedient version of this app. So it's like, well, why would you use a previous version of something like, you know, even Discord, right? Like, why would you go back? Yeah. And I think I definitely have started. I used to be a person who's like, just give me the most convenient version of it, right? But even something like, for example, like Resident Evil, the PlayStation 1 game is not super accessible. But you can get the GameCube remake and the HD version of like, and that's like now the accepted version of Resident Evil. Versus like, but if you're someone who really loved that PlayStation 1 version, that's a lot harder to get. And I've trended towards like something like the Resident Evil 4 remake. It's basically a separate game that just happens to be called Resident Evil 4. So there is that fear of like, well, that just becomes the canonical version of Resident Evil 4. But I think I'll always have a specific love for Resident Evil 4, the 2005 GameCube game.
Yeah, it's not like movies or something, right? Where you can if you get a Blu-ray release of, you know, this movie you love, that does effectively delete your need to have the VHS or the DVD. But like when it comes to video game remakes, like they're different games, like fully. You know, in most cases, like maybe you could make an argument for like the Halo 1 remake where you could switch back and forth between the visuals. Like maybe you could say like, oh, that makes the original version's in there, you know?
So like Resident Evil 4, like I think at best it could like be like the 2013 Evil Dead remake, where it's like people don't talk about that as being the same.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's
film.
a closer comparison. Yeah.
So that's sort of where I see them. But even like things like re-releases, there are things that like there. It's not always perfect, right? Like the recent Tales of Symphonia remaster is like, oh, we're planning a fix for like, because it released at 30 frames a second and like with some features missing, right? So it's like even when they're trying specifically to replicate like the game that you bought back then, there's always like, to some degree, there's always going to be a case for like the original version that is harder to access. But I think a lot of people are always like, well, just give me the most convenient version, right? Like give me the version that I can just play immediately. And there is always going to be there always is like a loss that happens in like the move to updated platforms and stuff that makes that stuff harder to get to if you want, like, for historical preservation purposes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't delete the old version. We like that version. Keep it around.
Yeah. I mean, game preservation is already super hard as it is.
Yeah.
Remakes aside. So,
yeah,
like, it's not the most optimistic future in some respects as things become more online and live service becomes more and more of a thing and those get turned off, servers and whatnot. Feels like the remake stuff is sort of just another part of that broader problem.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, shout out to the Video Game History Foundation and Frank Cifaldi over there doing God's work to make sure, we got copies of everything.
It comes down to, like,
Kelsey
I guess
Lewin
comes down to a studio, how much they value their own history with that catalog.
Yeah.
So if they care enough, they'll keep putting that stuff out and making it available,
Yeah, all those big like the Nintendos of the world need to have like a dedicated group of employees they just maintain the museum, right? They just maintain the archives and stuff. Like that just needs to be part.
Curated.
And even at
like
Nintendo,
that's
you
part of
gotta
the job,
You gotta imagine that there was that team when they were doing the Virtual Console stuff. That I'm sure someone there probably got kind of frustrated where they're like, we're just throwing all of that work out and starting over on the Switch. I'm like, we're just doing it for monthly services, right? I just finished porting Kuru into Virtual Console, and now you're saying it's going to be gone.
I was hanging on to my Wii U and my Wii for those reasons.
Growing increasingly valuable as like historic consoles and even those versions aren't perfect, right? Sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. I think that wraps it up for the Game Informer show this week. Marcus, thanks for hanging out. You're required. I asked you this morning. You have to. You could have said no if you needed to. I'm just kidding.
It's like, thanks for doing your job.
Yeah, but Serial, thank you so much. I just to peel back the curtain a bit, I think I messaged you like 10 o'clock last night. Say, hey, you want to go on the Game Informer show? So I appreciate it, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah. Any plugs? I'm sure people want to know what you're up to these days. If if you follow Game Informer history, Serial.
I'm by day. I'm a video game writer at Big Blue Sky Games. Not much else to talk about that right now. A lot of stuff going on in secret, but I am working on video essays still. It's been my next one has kind of been delayed for a while just because I've started a new job. But hopefully soon. But just look out for that. Patreon.com/my name, Serial Vasquez.
What's the actual YouTube channel? Is it? I always just Google Serial YouTube. I think is how I track it down.
Usually that should work. I can't imagine there are a ton of Serials. I'm sure there are, but I'm sure if you maybe Serial Games YouTube, it's so much easier to just give people things to Google instead of my name.
Right. Yeah. Let's see if that pull it up. Serial Game. Yep. Well, hold on. Maybe you can find it. Serial Vasquez YouTube.
Look up. If you look up Layers of a Screen in Immortality, I'm sure that's the last one I released. That I'm really proud of that one. So check that one out.
Serial Vasquez. There you go. That got me right there. I'm checking your work for you, Serial. So, but thanks so much for being on, and thanks for listening to the Game Informer show. Alex will be back next week, I think. He might be doing some traveling. Maybe I'll be stepping in again. I don't know. But thanks everyone for listening, and check out the latest issue of the magazine with Sea of Stars in the cover.